In this session, we have two final topics we're going to discuss before we complete Chapter 2 and say everything we plan to say about linear systems. That doesn't mean there isn't a lot more you could say about it. There are entire courses that are devoted to solving numerical systems linearly. But we'll look at these last two topics. The first one is stability, and then we'll take a relook at sparsity. So what about stability? As you're aware, a matrix can be singular or it can be non-singular. If it's non-singular, we can find an inverse and solve the system. If it's singular, we can't find an inverse. But is there anything in between? Is there something maybe that's almost singular but not quite? And the answer to that is yes. You can develop a matrix that is on the edge of being singular, and it's going to give you a lot of problems when you find the solution as far as stable numerical results are concerned. We're going to introduce something called the condition number that will tell us how bad a matrix actually is. The condition number can be anything from 1 to an arbitrarily large number. And the bigger the number is, the more unstable or the more singular-like your system is going to be. So we've only talked so far about making our computation speed better through avoiding using zeros when they aren't going to change anything. This time we are going to take a look at how to store a sparse matrix in a way that saves a considerable amount of memory. So let's take a look at an example system called a Hilbert matrix. The Hilbert matrix is very easy to define. You take integers starting with 1, form their reciprocals, and lay them out in the first row and also in the first column. Then you shift the numbers so that you start with the second position. You take all of the elements up to 1 over n, add one more, and you lay that in row 2. Then you shift it again and put it in row 3, and so forth. What this ends up producing is rows and columns that follow the same structure and clearly are forming a symmetric matrix. So what happens when we solve AX equals B? What happens when we form the inverse? What do the residuals do? So this matrix clearly has no zeros in it. And we're going to give a name for matrices that are primarily non-zero. We're going to call them dense. And when you have a dense matrix, you really have to store it in the form you're looking at, meaning the conventional row by column structure. But there are other matrices that we've already discussed that are not dense. The tridiagonal matrix is one that we will continue to return to, particularly at the end of the course when we study differential equations. There are other linear systems that have patterns of zeros that we could take advantage of as well, and all of those fall into what we call a category called sparse matrices. Now, it's possible to have zeros randomly scattered throughout a matrix, and they'll still be considered sparse, but we're going to get additional benefit if we can get a pattern to that sparsity, such as our tridiagonal system. Now, in today's world, we solve big linear systems, particularly when we're looking at airplane design. So we have a need to be able to handle these matrices so that they don't either swamp or exceed the memory capacity of the computer that we have. To get a handle on that, let's take a look at the matrix that we have here. This 4x4 is tridiagonal. It has a major diagonal, a super and a subdiagonal, and zeros everywhere else. Is there a way we could store that better? Let's try this method. So what if we took the main diagonal, these 4 elements, and put them in the first 4 positions of a vector? Then we took the super diagonal and loaded them in positions 3 through 7. And finally, we take the subdiagonal and load those in positions 8 through 10. If we did that, we would have accomplished storing these 16 numbers in a form that only required 10 floating point numbers to be stored. Now, in general, we would have to also keep track of what the row and column positions were in a second matrix. So for example, the 6, when we store it in position 1, will need to store in a side array, which I'm calling L, that has 2 columns and 10 rows. We'll put them as an integer array. As we move down to -8, that is stored in location 2, 2, so we record that in the L matrix. And so forth as we walk down the main diagonal and major and minor diagonals, we keep track of the location that they were in. If A were, in fact, a sparse matrix with either random zeros scattered throughout or not in a very good structured manner, this is the way we would have to do it. We wouldn't necessarily have to load them in this order. We could load them in any order we wanted, provided we're keeping track of the row and column numbers. However, as you can see, it requires a lot more overhead to maintain this. Now, at first blush, you'd go, this is really bad. I've got 3 columns I'm storing by 10. That's 30 positions. I only started with 16. I don't think that's so good. Well, try making this matrix a 5 by 5 and a 6 by 6, and you'll see it won't take long before the A and L combined matrix system takes a lot less space than the conventional square matrix. The other thing to notice is the L matrix can use integers, and integers generally take less space than real numbers. Typically, we will be storing A as floating point because I can't be guaranteed we're storing integer values in the matrix A. If we use double precision real, which is common today, then each one of these entries requires 8 bytes. That means these 10 locations cost us a total of 80 bytes. In the original square matrix, we have 16 times 8 bytes, or 128 bytes that we're storing. And in the L matrix, it depends on what kind of integer we use. Let's suppose that we used a 2-byte integer. That would easily accommodate not only this matrix, but matrices as high as 65,000 rows by 65,000 columns, and slightly bigger than that. If we look at this one, we have 10 rows and 2 columns, 20 locations, times 2 bytes, that would be 40 bytes. So our 80 bytes plus 40 is 120. This is even smaller than this matrix over here. If we knew the matrix would never get bigger than 256 by 256, we could change this to a single byte integer, and that only would require then 20 bytes in storing this result, bringing the total down to 100 bytes. And as the size or dimension of this matrix gets larger, the difference in storage becomes more and more pronounced. Let's take a look at an alternate way of storing a tridiagonal system or any sparse system. I could store it row by row. So I've taken A11 and A12 and loaded them first and kept their indices intact in my L array. Then I come down to row 2 and I store A21, A22, and A33, and they would appear right in these 3 positions here, and also keeping track of their indices. If you tried that, it would work fine, but it'd be a little more awkward than storing diagonals, since you only have 3 diagonals to work with in a tridiagonal system. But this system you're looking at here might be more effective for a different kind of sparse matrix. So what would we do with this matrix if we stored it? If we're going to apply the same kind of algorithms we had previously, we're going to have to learn to store and retrieve both A and L and reconstruct the Aij location without rebuilding this huge structure. It'll take more code on our part to be able to reconstruct the kind of algorithms we had earlier in this chapter. Now, on the other hand, if you have a structure with predictable locations for the zeros, you don't need the L matrix at all. And that is going to be the form we'll use in the homework. Why do I say that? Well, if I know that the first diagonal was loaded at the top of this vector, then I can predict the indices to be 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, and so forth. And I know when it gets to the end, and when I get beyond that, I can do something similar with the superdiagonal and then the subdiagonal. So there's an algorithmic way to reproduce the row and column locations without storing the L matrix at all. And I'm going to let you figure that out in your homework. And speaking of the homework, here it is. So in this homework, we are going to try to use a tridiagonal system. Don't store L, you don't need it, and you should be able to create an algorithm that reconstructs what the row and column locations should be logically. As a first step, convert that to a new matrix that is stored as a vector. Don't use the L matrix, just store it as a vector. Use the diagonal approach that we discussed in class. That's the best one to use on this. Go back to homework 2.1 and revise it to accommodate this new sparse system logic. Do it in MATLAB and write it to our class standards. So this altogether, points 1 through 3, will be 30 points of the score. In addition, if you'd like some extra credit for 10 points, go to Computer Exercise 2.2, go to Problem 4, it's on page 101 of your book, and by using the 2.1 MATLAB program that you already have, I want you to create the Hilbert matrix that we had at the beginning of the section, and I want you to do 3 of them. One should be a 5 by 5, one's a 10 by 10, and the last will be the 20 by 20. Calculate the residual matrix after you solve it and print its norm for each value of n, and then look up the condition number in the MATLAB library. You finally get to use a MATLAB function. You can use the condition function without writing it. It's a little complicated to write that. And just call it for all 3 of those matrices. Take a look to see the condition number degenerating as you go from 5 to 10 to 20. Now your books ask you for this special hand work that they want you to do. You can ignore that. We're not going to do any special handwork in there. We're turning this into a purely computational exercise. We are now done with not only section 2.3, but we are done with chapter 2. Big section, useful section. It's really an introduction to linear systems, for which there's a lot more that can be said, but that'll get you to a start on understanding how numeric systems are used to help you with solving linear systems of equations. So next time we're going to move to 2 topics. We'll start with interpolation. That really won't be too complicated, but it'll be a bit messy. After we're done with that, we're going to learn how to numerically differentiate. That's actually going to be fairly straightforward until we make it extremely powerful using Richardson's method, and that gets a little abstract, but very necessary as we approach the rest of the quarter. So see you next time.